So the focus of my study was to investigate Sean's model of reflective action to allow youth workers in an Irish context, experience the practice and develop a stronger sense of professional identity in their role. That was a huge thing, because what we were up against all the time with youth work was that people could describe what they didn't do. I'm not a guard, I'm not a teacher, I'm not a social worker, I'm not this. And all these negative comparisons led people further away from what they were actually doing. And what happened, you got some people, if they were in different projects, they were native. In other words, if they were in justice projects, suddenly they felt they were part of the whole justice system, which in a way they are, but at the same time, they still were, their background was youth work. So it was about trying to re-establish that identity again. And also, I think there is a political war between, let's say, health education and justice, to actually move youth workers more into what they would see as being their value base. And so, right, you know. Okay, so Sean's concept of knowledge and reflection and action are both validating and legitimizing qualities. They describe a new way of thinking and action that makes sense to practitioners and that applies to practitioners in many different settings. Sean has used, in his research for reflective action, he works with musicians, he works with athletes, he works with people building guns, he works with architects, he works with a whole variety of people, because what he wants to try and find out how they do in a situation where they had a difficulty, how did they actually mentally navigate through this? How did they actually understand what they were doing? And what he did was he focused on this whole idea of the tacit knowledge, what people would bring into it, and also an idea of problem setting, not problem solving. Because he said, like, if you set a problem, you have a variety of options. And the other thing is that the fallibility of professions. I mean, what happens is, I'm not an expert in reflective action, I'm not really an expert in much, but what I do know is that I have the capability of actually learning and adapting and trying to continue to develop and evolve. What Sean challenged most of all was the idea of technical rationality, that things fit nice and neatly into boxes, and as a result of that, then these are the particular answers, that everything is very exact. And if you look at the way the youth sector is being driven, and this has been happening since, if you look at what's happened in England in the early 2000s and late 90s, the whole connections thing, we are on a very, very similar path. The idea of exact measurement, predictable outcomes. Young people are not predictable. Youth work is not predictable. It's really about the process and the movement. That was basically what I used for the research, which involved people like, it was action research piece, I used cold, I used Lewin, I used a lot of different things. But basically it was just to give a flavour that everything I did really based on reflection. That was what we did. Now the reflective tools was practice journal, architecture journal and questionnaire, and we take the sessions. And again, people read their journals, after reading the journals they shared what had happened in the week, and then we had a discussion around what was on these journals. Now, they went through 4 stages really. First one was ventilation, because a lot of them were very, very fed up with the situations they found themselves in as youth workers. The second thing was moving towards clarity, you know, and this was really about saying, well, what am I and what am I actually doing, what's actually happening to me. The third one was about constructing practice based on inquiry. In other words, what they were saying was, well, what am I actually doing? And it's really about the what's and the whys, and trying to dig a lot deeper. And then it was about the validation practice. Because if Sean's model of practice is about legitimizing and validating existing skills, because you're not really teaching people things new, you're actually getting them to value themselves more. And it's about grounding what we do in a far more real way. And they did this by actually writing their journals and recording what they were doing. They say, yes, I'm actually good at this, I can actually do this, because it was so easy at the foundation stage for them to say, I've done this wrong, this is terrible. And their internal conversation, which Sean talks about, was really negative. But by the end of 10 weeks, they began to say, it's not important that, you know, that social workers don't understand what I do, or they want, or probation service don't do this, or whatever like this. What's important to me is that I understand what I'm actually doing. And the other thing is that part of my responsibility as a professional youth worker is to actually educate other professions on what I actually do. That it's not enough for them to come along and say, well, you're not one of us, so you can do a little bit of this. And they were sort of saying, well, no, actually, I'm a youth worker. This is the particular type of relationship I have with a young person. This is what my focus is, and this is what I'm actually doing. And this, if you want me to back it up with theory, I can do that as well. Okay, just something. Okay, reflection and action is the one that sticks in my head because it helps me analyse the situation as it's occurring. In other words, while something is happening, we're trying to figure it out. We're trying to problem set it. We're trying to, we're drawing from lots of different things. Conscious in terms of the event, the unconscious. Knowing in action, and that's what I'm talking about. Knowing action and naming it as a skill. These are quotes from people who did the research. And naming it as a skill is where we should be really at. After all, this type of intuition is part of your skill base, and by acknowledging it, knowing in action, you can in turn develop it because you can see it and recognise it. And that was a huge thing for them because they can say, well, I actually do have experience, and if I acknowledge and recognise this, it's a valid tool in my actual work arsenal, in how I'm going to work. Something with journaling. Okay, yeah. Interesting thing about journaling. Saying things aloud helps me come up with solutions. When we got people to read back the journals out loud, they heard it again, so it's like kind of reflection or analysis, and that had a real impact on them. So much so that people got quite emotional during it, but at the same time they were able to relocate themselves back into a situation and then work it through, and through group discussion to try and deconstruct it and move it forward. Thing about negative comparison. When I'm doing a home visit, I tell them that I'm not a teacher, I'm not a guard, I'm not a social worker, and that's how I describe myself, was reading a lot of nots. At the end of it, what they were saying was like, it doesn't really matter because I'm actually discovering what I am more as a youth worker, and I have more of a clear idea because of the relationship I have and because of the actual specific work I'm doing. Yeah, interesting thing here, and something you're not thinking. Young people don't need to be educated about what youth workers do because they turn up, they get involved in and engage. The fact is that they are very clear what youth workers do, but on the other hand, they seem very reluctant to turn up for other professionals such as social workers and guards, or don't turn up for them. What we're talking about is us educating our professionals around what we actually do, and this is part of our work. Okay, that was kind of more stage of development. I said if you want to bring up the next one. Yeah, I'll just read these two last bits and I'll go on afterwards. I started, was really kind of a reaction in terms of what changes happened to speech practice. I was starting to get a bit bored with what I was up to. Reflective journaling is giving me a way of moving forward and a sense of excitement. Of what could be. I've always asked myself the question, but I've never got much chance of it except for a wrecked head. The whole experience for me is totally surpassed any of my expectations. One thing that reflective action is not mulling over a situation over and over again. The idea is that reflection is an activity. So in other words, you actually engage in it. You're going to say, well, I'm going to reflect on this, but I'm going to get something out of it. I'm just not going to sit down and say that's awful or dreadful. It's about saying, well, where does it actually lead you to in terms of your practice? This is some sort of question. If I'm just conscious of other people's time. Yeah, just this. Number of tools, journaling, which is really the journals that they kept for 10 weeks. Critical incident recording, which is basically recording your own incidents of Hampton. Reflective inquiry groups. I still do those in UCC with my students. What we do is we get a skill sheet, some of them know all about these, and people then deconstruct it and really sort of say, everybody says, well, what would you do in that situation? What would you do differently? Just take one piece of work and just actually work it back down. A couple of things I'm working on myself is a thing called a walkthrough. I got that from an accountant. I thought it was a very good idea in terms of how we actually audit accounts. And I try to use that as a model. The cube, which is basically a compartmental analysis of a situation, and something which I have not come up with a better name for, which is sine wave analysis, phase inversion, which basically, I'm a musician, I'm a sound engineer, and I've actually figured out a way of actually doing something longitudinally with reflective action. This, I think, is important. I'll tell you, I always leave this last, and I always use this because this, for me, captured. Now, none of these people, like, out of the 4 people who we did this research with, 2 had no third-level experience. 2 had done degrees. One had done a master's, one had done a degree course. This person had not think they really kind of capture the whole thing. Keeping a reflective journal is crucial for remembering clearly the incidents from practice. Creating a link between the incidents and the context enables you to develop a frame for analysing the events, understanding your reactions, and through this, define your practice style. The reflective group discussions enable the process of externalising emotional reactions to events in a supportive environment. The group process supports the participants in legitimising practice and enables us to see ourselves as valuable as well as fallible. Reflective theory helps create a structure for reflection as well as enabling us to recognise, define and label elements of practice we had taken for granted. And for me, that was somebody else's work, but for the 10 weeks of work I did, then that kind of summed it up. And that I think is very important.